Hi, this is Greg Kilstrom. Welcome to Season 3 of the Agile World, where we discuss customer and employee experience, organizational and workforce transformation, and how business can adapt and continually improve in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed in this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles, or get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kilstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile World podcast. I'm excited to introduce part one of a special three-part series about how brands should approach their digital and customer experience strategies, brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. Today, we're going to talk with One North leader, Kalev Peekna, about how brands must evolve their strategy to elevate the customer experience. Kalev, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So first, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background and what you do at One North?
Sure. I'm the chief strategist of One North, which is a super fancy title and a way of saying that I lead the strategy discipline. Um, and strategy at One North is a multidisciplinary team. It includes brand, CX, UX, data, and technology. And we work in that deliberately multidisciplinary mode to help clients basically make the most of digital for their brands.
Great. So let's dive in here and talk about customer experience. From
Mhm.
your perspective, what makes a great customer experience, and why is it so important to get that right?
Yeah, such an important and somewhat philosophical question. Um, it's one of those questions that it can be really hard to find. It's one of those questions everybody wants an answer to, but it can be hard to answer. Um, you might start with, great customer experience is one that a lot of customers engage with and use. But I think even as individuals, we all have experiences. Maybe there's a purchasing experiences or a service experience that we use frequently and still don't really like very much, right? Um, I think like we did it for years with taxis before Uber came along. Now even Uber has its set of I would say regular but disgruntled customers, people who routinely use it but also complain about it. And
Right.
we have things like that in our life. So mere financial success or just engagement um, isn't always enough. Isn't really enough to designate a customer experience as great. When I think about it, I think a good customer experience is one that's not just financially productive, but one that leaves the customers with a set of positive feelings and impressions, and where those positive feelings and impressions are aligned to the brand itself. And specifically, so if they're experiencing um, a certain impression, such an impression that a brand is very smart, that should be aligned to that brand's platform. Like if the brand is going for smart, that's what the customer should feel. If the brand is going for easy to use, that's what the customer should feel. So it
Right.
really comes down to those end sentiments once the experience is completed. Are they both positive and are they aligned?
Yeah. So we certainly share the sentiment here that the customer experience is important, and a lot of companies say there's signs customers number one and all that. So everybody seems to agree that customer experience is important and it matters. Why do you think it's often so poor?
Yeah. Sometimes, I would say there are some brands out there that I don't think do think it really matters. I mean, I think Spirit Airlines, like the airline industry in general, is always a fun thing to think about in terms of customer experience. I think to
Yeah.
some of the brands in that place, it does matter, and they're competing on the basis of customer experience. There's some highly successful brands that don't even try to compete on the basis of the customer experience. They're competing on price point or like specific market availability or access, and that's fine. But for the people who say and feel that they really want to commit to competing on the basis of a customer experience, why does it still end up being so terrible? There's any number of factors. One is the first one I said is that they're good at saying that, but they're really not good at deep, thick listening to what customers actually need. And so, you know, they might, for example, have a lot of customer service data. I don't think that's the same thing as CX data, but they might have, a lot of that. They might have engagement data or sales data that they're looking at. Um, but they're not really investing in this sort of qualitative um, research that CX practitioners usually try to build into their strategy engagement. So they're not having deep interviews, focus groups. Um, when I've talked to people and met resistance when we propose that kind of research, the reasons are many. It often comes down to price or speed to market. They're so desperate to move quickly that they usually want to skip over the listening or the research. Um, or they may simply convince that they're not going to hear anything they don't already know. But it's extremely crucial to help people understand not just what the customer is telling you, and this is the trick to that thick or ethnographic research that CX practitioners advocate. It's important to understand what the customer's needs are, not just what they say that they are. And it's important to understand what their frustrations are, not just what they think, not just what they tell you their frustrations are. There's a good CX practitioner will try to look at an experience, a customer experience from end to end and adopt an observational stance, right? They're not just asking questions like, what do you think of this brand or what do you think of this product or service? They're trying to observe how that person interacts with or engages with that product or service, how they use it, how they acquire it, and note the points of friction or the points of delight that occur in a way for you or me that might just be automatic as individuals or customers, right? I guess if you go back in airlines, like we all presuppose that the check-in experience is what it is, the onboard experience is what it is, and we have a tendency not to articulate a lot of frustration about things that we don't think can change, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
but if you're investigating, if you're looking for innovation, if you're looking for chances to disrupt, if you're looking for chances to change things, your customers aren't going to tell you exactly what those ideas are. What you'll only get are the most obvious, most salient pain points, right? In which case, you should definitely fix those, but all you're probably doing at that point is catching up. There are a lot of other structural reasons why these uh, customer experiences go wrong. Sometimes even when you have the right listening, there's a lot of like debt in our customer experiences, meaning like we're a lot better at introducing new aspects to our customer experiences than actually letting go of the older ones, right? We're
Yeah.
very nervous about disrupting any service or product experience as it is today because we're worried that customers will just fall by the wayside. So we don't like taking away things. And that's a very human desire. It's why Marie Kondo has a career based on helping
Right.
people let go of things, right? Like I actually think that's a deep seated just psychological desire, which is like we don't like letting. We're so much better at acquiring new things than we are at letting things go, and it's the same thing with the customer experience. And what that leads to is I think a final point, and is I would say like many of the customer experiences, especially the ones where people are really looking for innovation, lead to complexity. And it's not something that we actually enjoy as individuals or as customers. Most people don't enjoy complexity. We actually really enjoy simplicity for the most part. But it's can be really hard for brands, especially established brands, um, to introduce simplicity into their customer service because they're really allergic to letting go of older ways of doing things, presenting things, or even having people engage with things. And I think that's very often the wedge that disruptors use for established brands to like unseat them, which is
Yeah, I
introduce
mean,
a customer experience that's radically simple in a way that the established brand would never entertain.
yeah, and you inferred and mentioned a little bit about some structural things, and I wonder there it's the disruptors. Not only do they have a novel initial approach, but they also don't have the baggage of departments and teams and applications and
Yeah.
those things that you're mentioning, and so it's sort of it is interesting to see that the true disruptors. They didn't even have the things to get rid of in the first place often, and
Hmm.
so yeah, these legacy companies are kind of struggling to what do you do with a whole team that was their sole responsibility was something that ends up being a bottleneck in some customer's process, right?
Right. Or what do you do with the leader who made, at one point a few years ago, maybe made their name or got their leadership position based on the thing that someone else wants to now throw out, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's very often where the real resistance happens, is at that mid to upper executive level. Because, um, sometimes what you want to simplify and get rid of are things that are not even just problems. They might be fine. But in order to arrive at that kind of like magically simple customer experience, you need to get rid of them.
yeah,
Um, that's very difficult for larger complex organizations to entertain and execute.
yeah. No,
And
agreed.
it doesn't necessarily mean firing the people either, but it can be hard for those owners of those parts of the process or experience to really let go.
Yeah. Well, let's shift to talk a little bit about more recent events, and
Hmm.
can you talk a little bit about how brands have adapted their customer experience strategy, because of the pandemic, and because of
Yeah.
some of those customer behaviors that have shifted because of the pandemic.
Yeah, yeah. It's been such a fun time to be a CX leader. A terrible time to be a human, but
Right.
a fun time to be a CX practitioner. Right. So terrible year across the board, for all of us as individuals, and not done yet, right?
Right. Right.
But for people in CX, what was amazing was to watch CX, and particularly like a digital customer experience, just leapfrog. So the most salient impact of the pandemic happened in the acceleration of digital. So I was in 2019 talking about moving people and helping clients work on their CX to move to a digital first mindset to CX, right? We were talking, and across dimensions, if that CX effort was done like in a recruiting or talent space, we were talking about helping people rework the recruiting strategy to, enable, the presumption that we'd be using digital tools like all the Zooms and the WebExes of the world to handle interviewing, and doing that because it was easier for recruits to schedule rather than going into offices or flying or that sort of thing. And we were talking about using digital tools to help with the application, the resume analysis, leveraging AI to reduce the complexity inside. That's just one example. We were
Right.
doing it on customer basis. We were doing it in a marketing standpoint, and digital first was really the mindset that we were going to most of our clients with. And what happened was that I think over the course of like literally March to April 2020, um, digital first got completely leapfrogged, and we by necessity entered into like we have to go from um, also past digital first to digital only, and we have to do it right now.
Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
everybody was required to establish almost completely digital means, and it had a lot of impact, like digital means to people to access their products and services, and it had a lot of impact. I mean, a lot of that initial activity was very ad hoc, and that's certainly understandable. I think a lot of clients of ours and a lot of brands are trying to reassess, okay, since I did things fast, furiously in an ad hoc manner, how do I reintegrate this experience so that it feels more brand aligned, is more positive, so I can reduce some friction. Um,
Right.
Other things that are interesting is that a lot of people really hadn't gone full force on issues of accessibility and inclusive design in their experiences because they had been leveraging analog experiences to provide access. So if you think about, you're trying to sell stuff through a website, if you have people that um, can't see or have like motion or like mobility issues. I think here, like a lot of financial services, there was a lot of like, okay, we'll just go down to the branch, right? That'll be how, and we'll be ready to service you there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that became impossible, right? You couldn't like leverage your in-person physical part of your product or service experience to make up for shortcomings in your digital experience. And so there's a lot of re-examination of those sorts of issues to make sure that your digital only experience is truly complete end to end.
Yeah.
And I think people are still working on it in parts. You know?
Right. Yeah, and I guess to piggyback on that a little bit, so not only recently, these brands have needed to change their, in some cases, massively upgrade, sometimes modify a little bit their digital presence, but structurally, um, as we were talking about at the beginning, not these organizations are not always, let's say agile, because this is the Agile World podcast, not necessarily
Hmm.
agile enough to to make quick changes, especially when customer experience. There may be a CXO or head of customer experience, but as we all know, CX affects and involves multiple teams and multiple applications and all that kind of stuff. So how how do organizations approach it? Like, how do they change to be more adaptive and quick and flexible enough? And what how do you work with an organization to wrap their heads around how adaptive they need to be able to be?
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about is that methodology alone is not going to save you, right? So
Yeah.
you can read any number of like agile books and follow the processes that they follow. But I think, those methodologies come from a world of making execution and delivery um, more agile, more
Right.
flexible.
Right.
And they do a really good job of that. We're huge fans of it. And there are ways to integrate and hook in certain strategy disciplines into like the overall sprint and epic rhythm. Um, but those methodologies in and themselves don't offer you easy ways to actually know where you're supposed to pivot when you need that flexibility, right? They offer you the possibility of a
Yeah,
pivot
it's not a
and a
decision making
reimagining.
framework. It's yeah, it's
It's
exactly
not a brainstorming framework. It's not a strategy framework, right?
right.
It's a framework that allows the delivery and execution to change when the strategy needs to change.
Yeah.
Um, but what we've seen is people kind of rely on agile itself and rethink and say, okay, well, we'll go to agile and that will make us more flexible, and then we'll pivot. Um, well, I think the pandemic really saw people like push people into like, okay, there's certain strategies that are like super immediate, super responsive, but then once they're done with it, and if they're facing those, once they're done with that ad hoc phase, which I think really happened even by the end of the summer in 2020, and they say, okay, now I want to make sure it's really great. You need to start joining up other disciplines, whether that's like from design thinking, which is something that we believe in. We don't practice it, and we like to say we're not strict practitioners; we're avid practitioners of
Yeah.
design thinking, or any number of the other strategy frameworks and disciplines out there. You need to make sure that you follow the right methodology for the right task, right? So
Yeah.
if you're going to do design thinking and use that to help generate the right sort of ideas and do the prototyping, you need to find a way to um, allow the outputs of that kind of framework to feed naturally into an agile framework, and that's something that we pay a lot of attention to. So knowing that our clients will expect to and want to deliver within an agile framework, we try to make sure that our outputs as strategists feed naturally into that. So if we're producing a roadmap, we feed into things that can more naturally become epics or even user stories, or we can produce our roadmaps within a framework that presumes that there will need to be, for example, an MVP and then releases or iterations beyond that. So
Yeah.
we do our part to set up agile for success from that framework. But what we have observed is that going back to the first point, is you can't expect agile on its own to produce the new idea or the direction in which you should pivot. That has to come from somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we talked about creating great customer experiences sort of at large. What about that personalized customer experience? What do brands need to think about when it comes to that?
Yeah, I mean, they've been trying. Brands have been thinking about this for a long time. I was joking with somebody. I think it's been more than 10 years. For 10 years, clients have been asking, or more. Clients have been asking me for like Amazon, like personalization features, and they've been implementing and experimenting. They've been using, they've gotten a lot smarter about the data. They've gotten smarter about leveraging technology, like AI in various forms to drive it. Um, you know, a personalized customer experience, like when you really think about it from end to end, is one that suits not just the individual and their need in the right context. And I think this is really what's on the edge when it comes to personalization is, you know, we've got a pretty good handle on, let's call it the demographic aspects of personalization, knowing who the person is along several different dimensions and trying to deliver products, services, or just content that is relevant to them based on those aspects of knowing who they are, right? It might be classic demographics like, age, income brackets, location. It may also be um, other things like what kind of job do they have, what kind of role or seniority do they have in that job. All of those things might drive the base to like who we are. The other dimension, which I think is a little bit more recent that people being smarter on, is basing it on behavior, right? So it's not just like who I know, but what I know about you demographically. Um,
Yeah.
but what has your behavior been? What are you? What are your habits? How can I match what I'm trying to deliver to you and fit it into your workflow as an individual so that it's not disruptive, so I'm not asking you to do something that's different so that you can encounter my product or service or content, what have you, in a very natural way. I think the final edge is really about context. It's not about general patterns of behavior or who you are. The final one is like what am I trying to do or actually accomplish at this specific moment, and that's the current bleeding edge of personalization, and it's hard, right? It really it takes a lot of data and smarts and some guessing to try to figure out what is a person doing. Are they just browsing? How close are they to an actual purchase point? If they're looking for information, why are they looking for information? And that requires a much fuller understanding, not just of the individual and their general preferences, but really of their journey and their overall experience. And that's where CX can actually come in and really help with understanding your personalization strategy, because a good CX engagement or strategy practice should be able to tell you not just who the person is, not just what their preferences are and their general habits are, but what their overall journey or pattern of behavior is and then for engaging with a product, service, or piece of information. And having a really good data informed understanding of what their journey is going to help you understand where they are at any given moment and then be able to personalize the experience to that moment. It was
Yeah.
long winded, but I hope you understand that.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, that's and I guess to kind of follow up on that. So we live. I call it consumers are device agnostic or even channel agnostic, and so we're not only are they
Hmm.
switching between a bunch of devices, but they're also switching between the digital and the physical world. Maybe a lot less so
Yeah.
in pandemic times, but we're coming out of it, and even in some cases there's no way to avoid the physical component of CX. So how do you
Yeah.
um, how do you work with companies there on, does personalization play as much of a role, and how do you work with organizations to make that digital physical kind of blurring successful?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. Picking up, from what you're saying, like context used to mean, I'd say in 2013, around the time that responsive design became a thing,
Right.
it used to mean a lot of like paying attention to the device somebody was using, and a lot of attention was paid attention to. We paid a lot of attention to device switching as a behavior, which is something we do very naturally. The last statistics I heard is like 12 to 15 times a day on average, a person might switch between a phone or a computer and a tablet, and they expect it to be completely seamless. That
Yeah.
much we've known for a while, but you raise a really important point, which is that they also expect a seamlessness between a digital and analog experience. And by what we say is seamless is very straightforward from their point of view, which is they expect it to just be one experience, right?
Right. Right.
So organizationally, we may think of like, okay, I've got a physical experience and I've got a digital experience, and there are different leaders and different groups working on that. And you're struggling with this, like, how do I integrate it? But from the user's point of view, it's straightforward. They're just buying one product, one service, whatever. It's just one experience to them. They don't
Yeah.
know about or care about the back of scenes complexity. And we actually saw a lot of that with the pandemic, right? Like, with the like sort of firing up of um, curbside pickup and things like that. I actually have a great example from my own local bookstore. It's literally around the corner from me. Um, and I think they really nailed it. Um, in that, it's been a long established, been there for several decades, great local neighborhood bookstore. Um, and they had a website, but that just did some marketing. You couldn't really buy things from the website. You could maybe place an order through a contact form for some kind of
Right.
special book, but for the most part, you had to like go to them. And I never did that, and I was always really frustrated with it because I'm one of those people that, like, really wants to try to buy local, and my partner's really good about pressuring me to buy local as much as
Yeah.
possible, but it wasn't a great experience. You'd go to the store, you didn't know if they had a book, you'd have to ask around, then you'd have to order it, then you'd have to wait a couple weeks. And they pivoted very quickly to allowing ordering from their website, um, of just about any book. And now I prefer it because what they do is they allow ordering from the website. They reconfigured part of the store to create this pickup area. It's very quick. It's in, you're out. The wait time is sometimes in an hour. I don't even have to wait a day for Amazon to deliver it, right? Because if they have the book, I just get a notification saying it's here and I can pick it up on my own schedule, right? I can
Yeah.
pick it up right when I get that notification, or a couple days later when I happen to be walking that way. And it's now become my preferred way to buy books because I think even though they're a small independent local bookstore, they've nailed this sort of seamlessness between what they're offering what they're offering in digital, and what they're offering in the physical space. So I think the key to really getting to that alignment is to maintain that customer or user focused, right? It's really key to recognize that it's still the same person. They're not a different set of customers. And to them, it's one experience, right? So your journey mapping, your planning, your service blueprinting, whatever you're trying to do, needs to keep that in mind. It's not about digital versus analog, and this is really where we've been pushing our clients. That's an unhelpful division, that doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
um, you need to go in some sense post digital, and we are actually talking to I talked to active clients right now that this is the world they're in as a result of the digital acceleration. You are now in a post digital world where that term doesn't have as much meaning as it used to because it's really just one experience to the user. They
Yeah.
don't see the difference, so they want one journey, one experience. Let's map it out, let's create it. And if we can maintain that mindset, we can get rid of those weird borders and friction points that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one last question before we wrap up here. You touched on this earlier a bit, but what do you think some of the lasting effects of the pandemic are going to be on CX?
Yeah, excellent question. I'm not overly fond of prognostication because I'm not always great at it, but I'm going to give it a go.
Sure, sure. Go ahead.
Um, you know, I think it touched a little bit on this. I think we're entering a post digital world in that sense, and it's not digital because digital doesn't matter. It's post digital because everything is digital. So
Yeah.
why are we still using that word, right? Um, so I think that that's one thing, and I think that's going to affect. It doesn't affect just CX, like that's the angle from which I'm coming at it today. But I think it's also going to affect concepts that are big in other areas, that are probably prevalent to anybody who's pursuing agile, like things like digital transformation. Um, I think even organizationally, we have directors of digital, but if they're directors of digital that are, owning, a subset of the product or services that are just digital, right? If they're on their own little island and silo, if that's on an expansive role, then I think that there's going to be some instability in terms of how clients or how businesses and brands actually approach that. And I think a lot of that is a result of this extremely rapid acceleration of digital transformation that brands can't walk back from now. So I think that's one of it. I think other trends is diversification of product and service sets is something that I think a lot of companies will be looking for. I think the shock that the economy received in 2020 um, taught people that they can't overly rely upon a single delivery model, um,
Yeah.
even if it is all digital. Right? It's not good to have revenue streams and delivery models that, even if they're great, are susceptible to focused risks like what we experienced in 2020. So I think people are going to be exploring ways to diversify how they deliver what they do. Again, whether that's a product, a service, content, what have you.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's going to be some really interesting exploration. The trick, of course, will be how do I maintain consistency of that experience? How do I maintain brand consistency, experience consistency, engagement consistency? Um, and so I think it'll be an interesting challenge. But I think financially and structurally for the brands, it's probably a good way to go.
Well, Kalev, thanks so much for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for people to keep up with what you and One North are doing?
We have a website, onenorth.com, which includes an ideas section that I am uh, more frequently requested to contribute than I actually have time to contribute to, but there are some recent articles. I think the benefit of going there is that you'll be able to see thoughts from truly multidisciplinary thinkers and doers across our organization. So you'll get to see and interact with thoughts from technology, from brand, from designers, from strategists like myself. And we're all thinking about the same things, but we're all coming at it from different angles. And I think that's part of what makes my work life so interesting.
Great. Well, wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Kalev Peekna from One North for joining the show. Learn more about TEKsystems and their perspective at teksystems.com/version next now. I'm Greg Kilstrom. Thanks for listening to The Agile World. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by TEKsystems. I'm your host, Greg Kilstrom. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, from my website at theagile.world.